So the name 500 startups is sort of now, it's sort of like you're past that. Yeah, but 840 doesn't have the same ring to it. I got it. Okay.
Doesn't sound quite as good. And we also have an accelerator, which we're also fairly known for. So we're probably one of the top 3 global startup accelerators based in Silicon Valley.
Terrific. Marvin?
So I'm part of a fund called Unicorn Venture Capital. It's brand new. We've just sort of launched just a few months ago. My partner and I had been in venture capital for several years before this. So I was at a fund called JASCO, which is Japan headquartered. Actually Japan's largest VC/PE firm. And my partner was with Sierra Ventures as a partner there for several years. Both of us, I think the commonality was 2 things. One is our regional focus. We always want to invest in companies in India and Southeast Asia, which I call emerging Asia, right? It's not China, it's not Japan, it's not Korea, it's not Australia. But it's got a huge amount of potential, and yet it's undertapped. The second aspect of that is there are companies coming out of that region which are going to be either global in nature, which I'm calling sort of global leaders, very obvious first, or they're going to be from that region for that region, emerging market champions. So those are the 2 broad flavors.
So, unicorn venture capital. Anybody know what a unicorn is in the context of venture capital investing?
You know, actually, it's very interesting you say that.
Okay.
I'm going to jump in.
You know the answer.
No, forget about the answer. This morning when I was walking in here, on the street, I see dmexco, and I see unicorn on the floor. So you guys should go and look at our Twitter feed. It's unicorn_VC, and you will see the picture there. So we found ourselves at dmexco.
There we go. So a unicorn obviously is a fictitious animal. It doesn't exist. Hard to come by. And a unicorn in the context of a venture VC investment is a company that is a massive home run, like over $1 billion of value. Because, you know, the way VCs, their model works is sometimes you invest 10 million and you sell the company, you achieve 30 million from your exit. Yeah, double, a triple over 5, 6, 7 years. That's called a single, right? You know, you in American baseball terminology, it's okay. You got your money back. You got a slight return on it. If you invested 10 million and you get 120 million, that's, you know, that could be like a double. You get 500 million as a triple. You go, you know, invest 100 million and you get 20 billion, which people have recently accomplished. Then that's a unicorn. That's like a grand slam home run. That's of course all American technology terminology. Stefan, tell us about BCG Ventures and how you're putting a little bit of a different twist on the space.
Sure. So we are a slightly different animal. We are a product innovation and commercialization company, which means we go in with startup teams and we develop digital products, and based on that, businesses for corporate clients. So we develop those products, and if the client wishes so, we develop them and commercialize them for them as well. It's a pretty new model. It's been around for less than a year now. Our sort of mothership sits in Manhattan Beach, California. And we've opened up our Berlin-based office just 2 months ago, and I happen to run that.
Great. So, venture capital is in the news a lot, and what you tend to hear about is the fantastic wins, the unicorns, the massive home runs, the inordinate amounts of money that these venture capitalists make from the winners. But if you step back and take a look at the industry and at the asset class of venture capital in total, it spells a different picture. In fact, in total, venture capital, there are some reports that suggest that over the course of the last 10 or 15 years, that the returns in venture capital of all investments is close to zero. And so that means that it's really just the winners that are making up of all the returns that we hear about, and they're really what drives your business. This slide is our lumascape of all the money that's pursuing digital companies, and we carved it up into growth funding, all the different categories, super angel, incubators, venture debt, venture capital, all the different machinations, growth equity, secondary, private equity, and hedge funds. So as you can see, there's over 430 logos, and I'm still missing some of the logos of even some of the folks on this stage. So there's a lot of people in this game. There's a lot of money being targeted towards trying to find these winners, and yet, as I mentioned, overall, the asset class returns are low. So my first question to you guys is, how do you manage this very fragmented marketplace where obviously your money coming to the equation is not the differentiator?
So let me take that actually. So this is for the most part, this is US. right? So I'm going to talk only about my region, so thank you very much. You guys can do the other regions. In Asia, what I'm looking at, emerging Asia, India and Southeast Asia, just to set some context here, depending on which countries you include in this, it's between 1.5 and 2 billion people. The number of VC firms, active VC firms who can write Series A and Series B checks, is under 25, 25 firms, right? And a Series A and Series B check is maybe anywhere from $1 to $10 billion, not $5 to $30 billion as it's on that chart. So the amount of capital available to the companies there is actually not that much just yet. On the other hand, on the consumer side, on the consumption side, and even to an extent on the exit side, there's been substantial activity. Just in the last maybe 7 or 8 years, I've got a private sort of list that I follow. There's about 9 companies which have achieved billion-dollar valuations just over the last 7 or 8 years.
Right.
So clearly there's activity, clearly there's actually results, not just potential. So there's I think good stuff happening there. I think the question about how do I personally compete with all of that, actually I don't. They're in a different space entirely from me.
But I mean, I'll tackle the question, but I mean, isn't that also an issue that there is not any follow-on funding, right? Like we have this challenge where you can invest in seed stage. If you don't have a lot of Series A and Series B, the terms tend to suck. And you also end up being squeezed out. There's just not a lot of, it's just very challenging because you don't have that money flowing in, right? So it's good you're being early, but do you question sort of maybe being too early?
Very, very true. So, which is why companies in emerging Asia are often told by the investors or generally the well-wishers, guys, get to revenue quickly. Soon after they get there, get to cash positive quickly. Don't be at the mercy of the financial markets. And I completely agree with that. I'm investing at the stage where they may not have revenue and we have just small revenue. So it's fully my interest to actually make them understand that and even more so actually help them. So we're actually doing a lot more sort of operational help with our companies. And saying, how do you actually increase and get to scale and so on quicker? The nice thing about the region where I operate, an initial pre-Series A or even a Series A financing, it's actually relatively small, right? It's anywhere from $500,000 to $2 million. With that amount of money in Silicon Valley, you could probably hire one engineer and you're set. Whereas in India or wherever else, you can do much, much more. Not just engineering, you can also do much more in terms of biz dev, you name it.
So this is actually a problem, right? Because Silicon Valley has this extremely well-honed ecosystem of money at all stages. So you get idea propagation, you get seed funding. Everyone wants to be, a private angel investor. You've got hundreds of thousands of people, putting $25,000 into startups just at the drop of the hat, or based on the reputation of the founder. If he sold a company already, he's a repeat successful entrepreneur, goes out for money, and everyone tosses money in the hat. And then there are all the stages they're on. And so that's humming, and you get this sort of circular thing. You guys are focused on, like Murli, other parts of the world besides Silicon Valley to find opportunities, because opportunities exist globally.
I mean, my hypothesis and thesis is that you look for local challengers that hopefully can get to, as Murli mentioned, sort of get into profitability and so they can sustain longer. We're also looking for a lot of international players who have great tech, but they actually could potentially bring, like enterprise, for example, B2B. Like I tend to invest in a lot of overseas B2B companies because we know we can bring that technology to the US. Because through our network, through helping them get funding downstream, our relationships with our early stage, we have to have very, very good relationships with all these VC firms. I won't say all of them, but many of the VC firms, right? Like we're upstream to them.
Stefan, you're in Berlin. How does it feel being in Berlin, being so far away from Silicon Valley? Does that matter? How's the ecosystem building on your end?
It doesn't matter a great deal. I mean, you described it very well. The Silicon Valley as a hub for technology investments has been around for, 60 years? Easily. Right? I mean, in Berlin, we're talking about some, meaningful numbers of startups being created and money being invested for, less than 10 years, I would argue, maybe roughly 10 years. And even today, I mean, the numbers are not comparable at all. I mean, the money being, we're also happy about, the scene thriving in Berlin, but the money being invested is a fraction of what's being invested in the Valley. So we're just at a different stage. And I think it's fine. I mean, it doesn't make any sense to do these one-on-one comparisons between places like Berlin and the Valley. However, what's interesting to look at is the trajectory a place like Berlin is on. And I think that trajectory is good. When we have, most importantly, an influx of people good people. I mean, you walk around Berlin these days, it feels like there's more people speaking English than German. Because it's become a very international crowd. That's new. That's been very different 10 years ago. I was at eBay for a number of years, and at some point, this is like 7, 8 years ago, eBay was making a decision about where to put the European headquarters. And the reason we didn't put it into Berlin, even though we had the biggest business in Berlin, was that at the time they said you can't hire international people into Berlin.
Right.
And you know what? It was actually true.
Right.
And it's not true anymore.
Okay.
That's probably the single biggest change we're seeing. So we're on a good trajectory, but you know, you were saying it early on, it's about money going in, money going out. There's been some money going in, there needs to be more money going out.
Right, you need the
and that's why I think actually the upcoming IPO of Rocket Internet is actually a very, very big deal for the Berlin startup scene. There's a lot of money going out or being liquid, let's put it this way, and that's a major, major milestone. And from what I see, it's, you know, Rocket Internet and, you know, their companies are by far the single biggest asset coming out of that scene, and we need more of that. We need billion-dollar exits, unicorns.
I want to get into the industry-specific stuff, but just before we move on, I want to address this issue of culture, because part of the reason why Silicon Valley grew up is that it started with a culture of risk acceptance. That all of these companies, actually the origins of venture capital came from defense spending and the scientific method of companies in the 40s and 50s, you know, trying experiments that didn't work, and failure was perfectly acceptable. In fact, it's expected, right? If you're not failing, you'll never succeed.
Yeah.
And it built up, and I think it was enhanced by the sort of kind of American cultural attitude towards risk, which is, yeah, go for it, why not? And that doesn't exist the same in Canada or in Brazil, or I'm going to guess in Germany, where people are a little bit more buttoned up, a little bit more conservative, and certainly not in Asia. How do you get past that in markets that when people put, yeah, I failed at this VC on the resume, it doesn't quite work so well?
So, you know, I made a similar presentation maybe 3 or 4 years ago to a university crowd, right? It was all students in the crowd. And I was actually pointing out about Singapore specifically, about how Singapore has gone through 4 waves of entrepreneurship and VC. And that's over the span of maybe 30 years or so. In the early days of, you know, this stuff happening, parents would tell their kids who just finished university, oh son, you just have to go and get a job in the government. It's the safest place to be.
Right.
And to an extent that attitude still exists, but it's much, much, much smaller. About 10 years later, after that sort of attitude sort of was still prevalent, people said, oh son, you got to go and get a job at Microsoft or Barclays Bank or whatever, some big company. Today, if the same kid goes to his parents and says, look, mom, I don't want to go and work for a big company, I want to start my own, or, you know, my friend started a company, I might go work for it. I think the attitudes are somewhat relaxed.
Slowly but surely, this is sort of creeping to other parts of the world. You guys see it, right? You're bringing sort of you're finding all these like-minded people in places like Sao Paulo and Amman, Jordan, and all kinds of places. Yeah. How is it propagating?
Yeah, I mean, we bring them to the Valley, like through the accelerator, not the seed investment side, but through the accelerator, we bring them over to the Valley, basically put them in a room.
Indoctrinate them?
Yeah, indoctrinate them, literally. And they sit there with a whole bunch of other Silicon Valley folks, and they're there for like 3-4 months. And so that helps. And then when they go back out, like as we send more companies out, they start building a little bit more of that community. It's a very lonely thing to do a startup. And so once you have that culture and community. But I think the other big thing is, I know we're going to talk about it later, but exits. Like, think about why there's a thriving ecosystem in Israel or Estonia. You know, Skype had 2 exits, right? That has changed the face of for example, the startup scene in Estonia.
Everyone wants to be an entrepreneur.
Yeah.
Yep.
So, you know,
is there any culture, German culture? How are we doing on entrepreneurism, failure? How's Germany with failure?
What do you guys think? I tell you what, Peter Thiel, famous founder of PayPal, one of the most outstanding entrepreneurs, investors and stuff. He was born in Germany.
Yep.
He moved to the US at age, I think, 3 or 4, so as a child. I bet you if he had stayed in Germany, he would not be a famous investor today. I tell you what, my generation, people in their 40s, late 40s, I hate to say, we're sort of a lost generation when it comes to entrepreneurship. When I graduated from business school, I'm telling you, like, nobody became an entrepreneur. Nobody. Everybody became a consultant, investment banker, right? Nobody became an entrepreneur. That's just the way it was. I can't even tell you why, but there is this cultural element. Now, the good news is, there's hope. Because some of the smartest people in the country are becoming entrepreneurs these days. So that's new as well. It just didn't happen 10 or 20 years ago. It is happening now. So some very talented people from Germany, but also fortunately mingling with the international crowd, are now wanting to be founders and entrepreneurs. So there's hope, but there's a long way to go.
But it's also helpful that a lot of these big companies are dying too and laying off people left and right. So
that's the talent.
Yeah,
right?
like Finland, right? Finland has an amazing scene, and you can thank Nokia basically, frankly, dying. Right?
Yeah.
So that's another thing we're seeing right now. That's the big corporates in this country. They're really starting to discover this scene. They used to be very remote from it, and you have all these companies, raising or racing to open up labs, incubators, accelerators. So there's a lot of that happening. That's, I think, helpful as well to foster the ecosystem.
I'll give you one other data point. I've spent some numbers in my own deal flow, right, over the past maybe few months. So we've looked at maybe a few hundred companies over the past just few months. And we track not just the names of the companies, what they do, and so on. We also track where they're from, where they're based, as in the entrepreneur, as well as where the company is based. Interestingly, the companies in Singapore, somewhat similar to your Berlin story, right? I'm finding that of every 100 companies, let's say half and half in my deal flow are from India or from Singapore. But the entrepreneurs are primarily foreigners, right? Maybe 13% or 15% are from Singapore, which is a good thing overall.
So I want to get, this is a digital marketing conference, so I want to get on to sort of industry specialization, and I would posit that the best VCs really run deep and understand their industries. In fact, all financial intermediaries, it used to be bankers could just be bankers, they knew how to run a process or something, or VCs knew about terms of investing, but now you actually have to become experts in the field in which you invest. Same way when I advise companies, we have to be experts, can't be a generalist anymore. How do you go about getting that kind of sector knowledge? I got a good idea how you do it, but please tell us about how you understand about decisioning for digital marketing like investments based on deeper knowledge.
Yeah. Couldn't agree more with what you're saying. And that's an interesting aspect of our setup because we're a subsidiary of the Boston Consulting Group, which is a global consulting company which has deep industry understanding across a number of industries. And so the idea is to actually bring that together with an understanding of technology, with an understanding of how to start up companies, and partner with corporate partners, so large companies who have a deep industry understanding themselves, but really know the digital space much less. So our objective is to bring these together and form businesses out of that.
Got it. And you guys I'm sure you do a lot of research.
We have a very big network in the Valley, and we've invested in a lot of companies. So we tap our community, which is we have like 250 mentors or experts across all different areas, and we also have over 800 companies, and we tap them. And also, I only invest in stuff I understand, right? So my background is digital media, e-commerce, ad tech, marketing cloud stuff, right? Because I wouldn't invest in digital health because I don't get it.
Right. The space is evolving so rapidly, so dynamic. You got to stay on top of it. For investments, how do you figure out what's going to be the next big thing? What's your discovery process? Because undoubtedly you're pitched by hundreds, if not thousands of people, you only make one investment. So what is the process through which you filter to figure out what's the next big thing that's going to drive your fund returns and make you massively wealthy? Massively wealthy. No?
You want to take that?
If I said massively wealthy in the US, I'd get like, woo! Okay, fine.
Let me try to answer that one. So, you have a general thesis of sort of where the world is going, right? So, for me, like marketing cloud, just being in the industry, you're like, well, this is going to be freaking massive, right? We think mobile's going to be big, but then it's sort of going and identifying. So, once you have the thesis on where the market's going, then you basically go and pick like, are these the right teams? Do they have the right product, the right approach? And you basically, and most of our deal flow is basically brought to us, frankly, from our partners, our community, other VC firms. And so that is a filter already. We work with a lot of these firms already, and they're usually brought to us where it's like, these guys are awesome, take a look at them, and then you kind of put them through your own filter.
So word of mouth, referrals, kind of like, unlike marketing, right?
It's total referrals. Everything's brought to us. Like we don't have to go and source.
Reverse inquiry, I like that. That's what you can do when you have a well-known founder who goes all around the world dropping the F-bomb. Anybody know what the F-bomb is? It's saying the word fuck.
And he's PayPal Mafia.
And he's very famous for it, and so very popular, and he's a fun guy, and so that's good. How do you guys drive? How do you figure out winners?
So for me, actually, some of the early part of what he said is actually very similar. We understand our markets very, very well, and they're very different, especially for the local innovation. Very different from Western markets. So I told you about 1.5 billion people.
Right.
But at the same time, if I just take India as an example, and there's many other countries in the region, if I just take India, every single person in this room would be considered among the top 5 or 10% wealthiest people in India.
Right.
Every single person. Because the definition of wealthy is anybody with above $35,000 in income.
Right.
Middle class is from $7,000 to $35,000.
Yep.
And there's about 400 million people in that, or maybe 200 million. Another 400 million people in sort of the sub-middle class. So taking the approach of, look, I'm going to target the middle class consumer the way I target them in Germany or in the UK or the US, it's just not going to work.
Right.
So we understand the market dynamics. On the company level, I actually don't think there is any such thing as a big idea. There is no next big correct idea. Yesterday, somebody made a point about the same question, but in the context of a marketing campaign. How do you get your next big marketing, big idea to go viral? And he said, and I agree with him, there is no such thing.
Right.
You got to make sure that you have preparation on all that.
Do your
homework
area. Right. Figure out what the terms are. Yep.
In hindsight, might be the big idea, but you don't know when it's going in.
Right. And of course, the critical thing for these exits is, of course, the buyers.
Yeah.
This is our strategic buyer Lumascape. What we've done is we've got 175 companies all over the globe, ranked or sort of categorized by type, media marketing, technology, and network, by propensity. That's the proximity to the center means you're more likely to do a digital deal. That's subjective, of course, but I think you can just sort of look to see what deals are being done. And it's kind of a variety of other ways. It's B2B on the left, B2C on the right. And it's really this group that's driving all the returns for VCs. So you could take the inner circles. It used to be that in digital media, digital marketing, the middle four plus News Corp, those 5 companies, until 2006, represented 50% of all the buying of companies, of startups in the space. 50% was 5 companies. Fortunately, we live in a world today where there's a lot more buyer diversity. There's a much deeper bench where companies, that are pretty far afield, from Visa to Walmart to, Marketo to Time Warner, who are all interested in the kind of capabilities that exist in digital marketing. How do you guys develop relationships with these strategic buyers? How do you advise your invested companies to sort of get on the radar of these guys and ultimately, hopefully, achieve an exit?
Just let me point out one thing that is, I'm just wondering where the first European company is in this. I mean,
there's so it's,
no,
of course,
if you go from the inside out, of course there's too many companies on this, but go from the inside out.
By definition, the less active one. So yeah.
Exactly. So, but that's again goes. That's a huge problem, obviously, that the corporate buyers are actually, there's a big hole there, right? We're missing them, and so it has a lot to do with trying to actually work with some of these big companies and educate them.
Yep.
That actually investing in younger companies, maybe later stage or early stage startups, is a very, very important way of actually getting innovation inside your company. And so that's a lot of what we do, is talk with corporates and help them understand this space and help them understand how it can contribute to their core business to be a more active investor.
Well, and I think to Murli, I think to your point, the corporates are now embracing startups and actually seeing that there's a value add for them to understand all this innovation as well. And maybe that's helpful for them to propagate, getting to know these companies.
Interestingly, in my region, those 4 companies are responsible for none of the billion-dollar exits.
That's right.
0.
That's right, okay.
Of the billion-dollar companies in the region, none of them.
Yep.
It's been more guys like Naspers, SoftBank, Rakuten, companies maybe that not even heard of in this part of the world.
Got it. So it's geo specific. So in finality here, my last question is, how excited are you about digital marketing, and where would you spend your next dollar? If you had your next $1 million to invest, where are you putting it?
Putting it all in mobile.
All in mobile.
Yeah, all in mobile related. Ad tech, Tap Forward, which is mobile data. Silver Push, which is mobile retargeting.
Okay.
Anything with video, Vungle is one of ours too.
Murli, have you seen something here at dmexco that warrants, from going around Expo, where would you put your $1 million?
To be honest, I'm not looking for deals here. I'm looking for deals back home. So
In theory. Play along now.
So my main focus, if you're asking me where I put my money, is actually companies which are targeting user bases of these major
So
Silicon Valley
B2C,
giants.
B2C.
Not just B2C, B2C as well.
Okay,
Yeah.
cool.
I'm going to be boring.
Stefan, where are you going to put money?
I'm going to be boring and repeat mobile because I think it's still a very open space.
You're going to?
I'm going to repeat mobile.
Okay,
That's what I feel.
mobile. Okay. There you have it, folks. Mobile is the winner in the category amongst the VCs. I want to thank all of these folks, and thank you.